Good afternoon. Welcome to Wealth Building Now and Tomorrow, Getting Started at Home. This is the fifth and final installment in the Chamber's Racial Wealth Gap series sponsored by Putnam Investments. I'm Jim Roney, President and CEO of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. Over the past 7 years, the Chamber has embraced economic inclusion as a priority issue for our business community. We are proud of our work, including the Pacesetters Supplier Diversity Initiative, ongoing policy advocacy that supports diverse and small businesses, our recently launched Massachusetts Apprenticeship Network, and the meaningful work of our board to include more people of color and women. With this virtual event, we are hearing from the experts leading in local government, philanthropy funding, and investor strategies to urgently lead the business community forward to action. And with our virtual audience, including individuals from across Massachusetts and from every industry, we know that this is an issue that demands our collective action. On the research side, in partnership with the Boston Foundation, the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, the Barr Foundation, and the Eastern Bank Foundation, the Chamber is proud to be a founding funder and partner in relaunching the 2015 Color of Wealth Report. But unlike the 2015 report that published the survey results and stopped there, a key goal of this initiative will be to include critical research to discover economic policy, community solutions that will successfully address the barriers that hinder the creation of generational wealth for communities of color. So today we will conclude this series and identify actions we can take as business leaders and community leaders. While we actively work to close the racial wealth gap, it's also important to take stock of the work that is already being done by our visionary leaders in our community. In fact, today we're going to hear from some incredible leaders who are at the forefront of these efforts. Once again, I want to extend a huge thank you to Dr. Carolyn Crockett, who was instrumental in leading the Chamber effort and our region in this critical work. Before we get started with our panel, a few logistics. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be shared on the Chamber's YouTube page. I encourage you to utilize the chat and Q&A function during today's conversation. And finally, once again, a big thank you to sponsor Putnam Investments and its CEO, Bob Reynolds, for their support of the Racial Wealth Gap series. With Putnam's support, we're able to make this program series free and widely accessible throughout Greater Boston and Massachusetts. With that, I'm honored to welcome Stephen Denny, Head of Human Resources, Diversity and Inclusion from Putnam Investments, to introduce today's panelists. Stephen, take it away.
Thank you, Jim, and I'm very excited to be here today. A bit sad as we get to the fifth in this series. On behalf of Bob Reynolds and the executive team here at Putnam Investments, welcome everyone. Here we're dedicated and committed to helping individuals and institutions succeed, and we offer an array of products to help them win. We believe in performance excellence, and we are proud to partner with world-class teams and organizations who share our beliefs in teamwork, our dedication to winning, and those that maintain a focus on performance. Therefore, of course, we're delighted to partner with the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce on this Racial Wealth Gap series. It has been quite the journey in doing it. Under Jim's leadership, the Boston Chamber continues to be a voice for truly diverse and an inclusive community, and one that leaves no one behind. This is evident by the many offerings you just heard Jim talk about and the things that they continue to do under his leadership, him and his team. Jim, I can remember when just about a year ago, we talked in concept about this series, and now here we are, the fifth in the series, and it's been terrific, and we really thank you for all that you are doing and continue to do. On behalf of Putnam, and it's my pleasure to introduce the panel today. First, we have Shagun Idowu, Chief of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion of the City of Boston, joining us today. There he is. Shagun began serving as President and CEO of the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts He's the chief advocacy organization for Black businesses across the Commonwealth. When stepping down from that role in December 2021, Shagun joined the Wu administration in his current role, where he's focused on making Boston a resilient, economically equitable, and vibrant city that centers people and creates opportunities to build generational wealth for all communities. And this is exactly what we're talking about. And I'm honored to have you with us today, Shagun. Next, we have Betty Francisco, CEO of Boston Impact Initiative Fund, an impact investment fund here in Boston. And I don't know Betty personally, but I've worked for many years with her husband, and I've heard so much about them. I feel like I'm introducing a legend right now when I talk about Betty. Betty is a business executive focused on impact investing. She's a community leader who's known as a powerful convener, change maker, and champion of Latinx and BIPOC leaders. She's also the founder of Amplify Latinx, a social venture that is building Latinx economic and political power in Massachusetts. Prior to doing this work and giving back to the community, Betty was general counsel at Compass Working Capital, where she oversaw the organization's legal affairs, compliance, and risk management. Thank you for joining us, Betty. And now I can tell your husband that I've met you, and he is not the leader in the family. So happy to do that. Also joining us is Paul Lee, chair and founder, there Paul is. Chair and founder and current chair of the steering committee of the Asian Community Fund at Boston Foundation, which is dedicated to strengthening the AAPI community and promoting collaboration and unity among all communities of color. And you can get to see that wonderful background that he has there. Paul joined Goodwin Procter in Boston in 1980, and he was a partner there, representing public and privately held technology and financial services companies in business, corporate governance, and transactional matters. He's the founder and board president of the Asian Community Development Corporation, which has built 3 housing projects, contributing over 600 units, 600 units. I'd like to emphasize the numbers of housing in the Chinatown community, including 250 affordable units. So great work that Paul continues to do within the community. And Paul, we're glad to have you here. Next, we have Brett Goldstein. Brett works with us here at Putnam, and I've really gotten to know Brett really well over the last year. And when I'm in a room with him, I feel like I'm missing something. There's so much intelligence that comes out when he's in the room. I'm always learning something. It's a pleasure to get to work with him. He is the co-chief investment officer of the Global Asset Allocation Investment team here at Putnam, and he's one of our executive committee members. In his role as co-CIO of Global Asset Allocation, he directs the overall strategy and positioning of our global asset allocation products. Brett has been in the industry since he joined Putnam in 2020 and works extensively with retirement glide path research and as I talked about, the global asset allocation target date funds. He continues to do excellent work for us here at Putnam. And just a point of note, honored to have you with us, Brett, today. I know you're on baby watch and it could be any minute. So glad that hopefully we'll get through this. And last, but certainly not least, bringing back in Carolyn. It's been a privilege. Again, a year ago, we started this conversation, getting to work with Carolyn and sort of build out this series. And if I were in school, Carolyn would be my professor, my favorite professor. I've learned so much from her over the last year. It's been terrific. And Carolyn is the professor of urban history, policy, and planning at MIT. I probably wouldn't get in at MIT, but I certainly would want you to be my professor. Carolyn's career mission is to continue to work at the nexus of education, economic development policy, and urban revitalization. When Carolyn completed her service as the first chief of equity, a cabinet level position with Mayor Walsh, which was established to embed equity and racial justice into all of city planning operations and work moving forward. And we see that work continues. Carolyn, thrilled to have you again and share this platform with you, and I'm sure I'm going to continue to learn. So thank you very much for all that you're doing, and I'll turn it over to you.
Stephen, thank you so much for such warm introductions for all of us, and I can assure you that you would be a star student. I already know that you'd have an A in all your courses with me and anyone else at MIT, so it's been really wonderful to be on this journey with you these last few months, and thanks again to you and the team at Putnam. It is hard to believe that we are wrapping up our racial wealth gap speaker series today, but welcome to all of you. Today we're zeroing in on innovative investment strategies that set the ground for long-term wealth building for individuals, families, and businesses. And these strategies include policymaking, fundraising, giving, corporate strategies, you name it. Jim and I launched this 5-part series in April of this year, and we've been inspired by each panelist and the hundreds of audience members who have shared their questions, concerns, hopes, and dreams for themselves in our city. We've heard from an impressive array of nonprofit, for-profit, philanthropic, and public sector leaders, and today will be no exception. We've looked at lots of data on Boston's racial and ethnic wealth gaps, data from the Boston Fed, data from leading universities and national think tanks. And most importantly, we've really honed in on proven strategies and solutions, from multiple paths to home ownership, to big picture investment planning, to future-focused job creation and workforce development. Our speakers have challenged traditional ideas about how intergenerational wealth is built and sustained. If you're new to this conversation today, welcome. And if you've been along for the ride with us these last few months, welcome back. It has been my distinct honor and pleasure to be involved in these conversations and to really have a chance to bring together people that I have admired for a long, long time. And that is absolutely true for the panelists here today. You are all in for a real treat. If you can hang in with me, I am battling a little bit of a head cold. It's nothing more serious than that, luckily, but you will have to hopefully can bear through my very smoky, slightly sexy radio voice. But I'm so happy to be amongst friends and family today. Absolutely the case. In 2015, the Color of Wealth report delivered nothing short of a lightning bolt of data that galvanized a transformative set of organizations, policies, and investment strategies for closing Boston's racial and ethnic wealth gaps. Many of these efforts, seminal efforts, were launched by leaders who are here with us today. These leaders are working at the highest levels of on-the-ground change-making across Greater Boston. Their actions and decisions affect entire ecosystems and constellations of institutions that power our daily life right now. Welcome to our panelists. As moderator today, my job is to help keep our conversation moving along, to get us out of here by about 3 o'clock, and to make sure that those of you who are in our audience have a chance to have your questions heard. So please take advantage of the chat feature, and I will keep an eye on that so that we can feed in some of your questions as the discussion moves along. So welcome to the panelists, and let's get this conversation going. Let's turn to our chief here, my friend, Chief Idu. It's so great to have you on the call and to know that this is actually our first time being together in your new position. So, congratulations on this incredible appointment. Our city is so fortunate to have you in leadership. For all the years that I have known you now, you have led really path making work to push the language of shared prosperity into real gains and wealth building opportunities for populations who have often been left out of economic mobility. Now that you have this new post, this new platform, hopefully you can share with us your vision for closing the racial and ethnic wealth gaps in your new role as Chief of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion for the city. Chief, welcome. Would love a chance for you to hear from you and have you open up our discussion.
Yeah, well, great to be here, first of all. And, also happy to share the stage with someone else who has a great radio voice. So this is fantastic. But longtime listener, first time caller, as you said, this is our first time, not just in this role, but I think on a panel together like this. So anyway, great to be here. And with friends, Betty and Paul and Brett. Want to thank Jim for this opportunity and the chamber, my good friend Celia. So always a pleasure to be amongst friends and family like this on a discussion that I know is near and dear to all of our hearts, but also, after this call and before the next call, we're all working hard to help address. And so that's inspiring as well. I appreciate the way you asked that question, because usually people ask the question, now that you used to yell about all this stuff before. And so now that you're in this role, what have you done, or what do you want to do? So you have a way better way of asking that question. But it's been interesting going from the role of an advocate to continuing that advocacy, but being on the other side of local government. And, I often say I have a deeper respect for public servants after 10 months and 12 days now in this role. But it's been enlightening, but also incredibly rewarding seeing what government has been able to do in the short amount of time. And so when I think about the question on, how we're defining what we're doing or how we are attempting to address the racial wealth gap, one piece I appreciate about Mayor Wu is that, she understood who was coming into this role, and the fact that my positions when I was at BECMA have not changed simply because the title has changed or the particular position. And so I continue to believe that when we are centering communities of color in all of our discussions at the top of the conversation, as opposed to tacking it on at the end, that we will truly, all of our communities will benefit. And one thing I used to say at BECMA was that the development of some communities cannot coexist with the underdevelopment of communities in other places. And so our focus in the short time we've been here has been on the neighborhoods of Mattapan, of East Boston, Roxbury, et cetera, to ensure that we are spreading all of the resources around as opposed to them going to the same places they've always gone. In fact, we were happy today to be able to announce, $13 million to 1,000 businesses across all of our neighborhoods, as opposed to what we've seen before, which is they might have been in just certain areas. So end of the day, when I think of the work that we're doing, Stephen, who I appreciate your introduction, mentioned in those comments, the new vision of our cabinet of economic opportunity and inclusion. The name was changed because a lot of people, when they think of economic development, recoil at the term because they think of the conversations around gentrification and displacement. And so, of course, our work continues to be fostering opportunities, but equity, inclusion, undergird all the work that we're doing. And so that new vision that we are promoting and championing everywhere of this resilient, vibrant city that is centering the people that we're seeking to impact, communities, as you said, that have historically been excluded on purpose most times, but centering these communities as a way to help build generational wealth. And so making sure that whatever we're doing to help Bostonians today is something they can pass down to future generations. So, I'm looking forward to the conversation, but there are so many things that we're doing to fulfill this vision, but at the same time, reimagining the way that government plays a role in doing this, because government sometimes acts like it can do it alone, but it can't. And so as I opened up talking about friends and family, these are also partners on the call that we've been working lockstep in to address this issue.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chief. And so excited to hear about this new announcement, investment into so many businesses that I know you've been laser focused on, along with the new administration coming right out the door. So thank you for that. Betty, let's turn to you. Speaking of investments, many folks on this call know you in the city and know you in this space. And now you are in a relatively new-ish role, steering the Boston Impact Initiative, which has its well-known mission for bringing a racial justice lens to impact investment. Betty, can you tell us a bit about BII's work and how you are driving investments for closing the racial and ethnic wealth divide? So happy to have you. Welcome.
Well, it's great to be here again with family and I with my fellow advocate over here, Shagun. I miss you in our, in other circles. But no, it's great to be in this conversation, and I appreciate the chamber series on the racial wealth gap topic and just sharing different perspectives, right, on what it could look like. From multiple leaders. So a little bit about BI. So I started last year as CEO. I have been a corporate lawyer for almost 22 years. So I literally have left the law to now become an emerging fund manager. And why I tell you that is so important to me is because there are so few of us, not just in Massachusetts, but in this country. And what I mean by that is there are very few people of color moving money in ways that are going to transform our system so that more entrepreneurs of color, people of color can access the capital they need to grow impactful social ventures. So this role is particularly important because of what I'm learning on how to do it, but also how BII is trying to create a new cadre of impact investors, especially diverse investors and emerging fund managers that are going to move capital differently. So BII is structured as a nonprofit charitable loan fund. We are focused on investing in entrepreneurs of color and communities of color with the goal of building financial, social, and political power in our communities. And we do this with a particular investing strategy. So we take full spectrum or integrated capital approach. So we use equity, debt, grants to support companies, and we invest across the whole capital spectrum. So we'll do everything from loans, lines of credit, receivables financing, to equity investments that run the gamut from safes, preferred stock, et cetera, to support entrepreneurs where they are. So we structure investments to meet the needs of entrepreneurs rather than saying we have a particular product and here you go, this is what you get. One of the things that's also important is in our fund structure, we made it intentional that we also wanted to provide investing opportunities for what we call community investors, non-accredited investors. And that's important because oftentimes regular people don't have the chance to invest in private funds that not only can deliver a small return, but can also deliver a lot of impact. So that's really important around the model that BII created. And then I'll give you a little background. So BII back in 2018 launched its first fund, Fund One, which was again structured as an integrated capital fund focused on investing in entrepreneurs of color or in businesses that supported wealth building in communities of color. And that was a $7 million fund that's fully deployed now across 50 enterprises in Eastern Massachusetts. 60% of the whole portfolio is governed by people of color, and 81% of the workers in those businesses are people of color. We are now launching a $20 million fund, right? So we're looking at what is the need right now in our ecosystem. There's a lot of debt capital in the market right now. Our CDFI community partners have been great at putting more money on the street. But there is a lack of equity capital that is needed for some of our businesses to begin to grow and scale. And that's what we call the patient, non-extractive equity capital, not venture capital, which does not reach our entrepreneurs. And so BII wants to fill this need that we see right now for this patient equity and focus it on businesses owned by people of color and also in community owned and controlled real estate, right? So when we talk about how do we build business ownership in communities of color, how do we help our people own and maintain control of their businesses, we need the kind of capital, right, that is impact investors will focus on, and it's the one that will seek to give back equity instead of taking more of it. So we're structuring investments to give opportunities for our founders and workers to buy back that capital and retain ownership and build wealth. So I'm excited about this new fund because one is it's going to have opportunities for our ordinary people, our community investors. It's also going to be much more focused on ventures that are building climate resilience in our communities, that are going to grow and democratize power. So employee-owned, cooperatively owned ventures are something that's really important to us, and we don't often talk about, right? Businesses owned by employees. There's a new survey that we just conducted as part of the Coalition for an Equitable Economy, which showed that white entrepreneurs, about 27% are thinking of exiting their businesses within the next 5 years. And that opens up the door, right? Rather than selling those businesses off or closing them down, there's an opportunity for employees maybe to become owners of those businesses or to transition those businesses to diverse ownership. So a lot of opportunities that we're seeing right now to actually create some changes in capital access so that we can begin to increase business ownership for people of color.
So great. And I hope, Betty, before we get off the call, you'll let our audience folks know more about this new fund and how they can jump on and get involved. This is great. Thank you. Paul, let's turn to you. You have had a career spanning equity-driven and justice work at the local, state, and national levels for decades here. Here in Boston, we've mobilized public and private resources for Chinatown, as Stephen discussed in your intro, by founding the Asian Community Development Corporation. And most recently, you founded the Asian Community Fund to grow power and advocacy for Greater Boston's AAPI communities. What should our audience know about ACF and your own thoughts on building long-term wealth for communities who have that as a target? This is really wonderful to be able to pick up on this thread here that the Chief and Betty have laid out in terms of new work, new opportunities, and really happy to hear from you and learn more about ACF. Paul, bring us up to speed.
Well, thank you, Carolyn, for the opportunity to join this incredibly accomplished and dedicated and passionate panel, and for the opportunity to share my thoughts. Just a couple words about ACF. The Asian Community Fund is the first and only philanthropic fund in New England dedicated exclusively to the needs of the API community. So we're working to build the strength of the community by bringing together all the different ethnicities, from the 25% of the town of Shrewsbury who are Indian American to the 33% of Lexington who are Asian American, to the fact that the city of Boston, 1 in 10 residents are Asian American. We're trying to bring all of us together to work together for the benefit of the Asian American community, but also working together with the other communities of color. Recently, we launched the Asian Business Empowerment Council, ABEC, we call it, which is a platform to increase economic power within the AAPI community. It's modeled on the incredible work of Shogun at BECMA and Betty at Amplify Latinx. And ABEC is trying to address the systemic disparities that limit business ownership, growth, and sustainability. And ABEC is becoming the organizing force and central hub for AAPI entrepreneurs, business owners, advocates, and service providers. So that's what we're kind of doing on an organizational level. But what I'd like to do is kind of share my thoughts with you about building wealth. My lived experience is as a person of color from an immigrant family, trying to succeed and thrive in an environment that is not set up for people of color to succeed. When I joined my law firm in 1981, it had 100 lawyers. I was the second person of color, and there were about a dozen women, most of whom were junior. When I became a partner, there was this sense of a person succeeding against all odds, of being a unicorn. It was the exception and not the norm. And I think it's really important for us as a society to readjust our thinking, that there are talented people in all communities. There are good people in all communities. And success is not the exception. It needs to be the norm. Because if it's the exception, then we're going to have studies like the Color of Wealth study that looking at average net worth in our communities, it's going to show great disparities. But if we talk about it being the norm, then the norm and the average is going to be, we're all going to be converging together. So I'd like to start there by saying, let's stop thinking of ourselves as exceptions. The second thing is my thought on building long-term wealth. I agree that home ownership and opportunities for business ownership are important. But I think of something more foundational and fundamental, and that's for workers to be able to earn a livable wage, not to have to work 2 or 3 jobs to pay the rent, buy food, or get health care, not to have to live paycheck to paycheck, where one setback, you're one setback away from losing it all because of a rent increase, an automobile accident, illness of any member of the family, wage theft, or as we heard about in the Boston Globe this week, school bus drivers being late to pick up your kids, so you have to take off from work to take your kids to school. As long as families are living paycheck to paycheck, it's going to be really hard for families to build wealth. So I kind of start there. And, obviously, the point is, why are folks living paycheck to paycheck? And it's because we as a society are severely undervaluing what our low-income workers are providing. As these are people that during the pandemic, we realized were providing essential services. The folks working for minimum wage to keep our grocery shelves stocked so that we could buy food. Restaurant workers. Sorry about that. That call was actually from your boss, Chief Idowu, the mayor. So I was saying, you're one paycheck away, and we're severely undervaluing first responders who are saving people's lives, bus drivers who are powering the transit system so that we can all get to work. Why are workers who analyze data to maximize traffic through social media sites more valued than teachers to whom we entrust our kids for more than 6 hours a day, or the childcare workers who enable us to go to work? So I would encourage employers to look at the individuals and to see the value that they're adding to your organization and pay them accordingly, as opposed to sort of using kind of societal norms that we've used. And I would encourage the workers to realize the value of what you're doing, so that you can have pride in what you're doing. And I think a lot of employers now are starting to use the term team. They're not calling employees anymore. They're calling them team members. But how many of them are really acting on that and really treating them as team members, where they're paying them a fair wage? They're invested in the person's success. They're invested in the person being able to have the work-life balance to raise a family. I think we can all come together in all these things. So this is probably a little bit different direction, Carolyn, than you might have expected me to go, but I just kind of wanted to put this out there.
No, it's great, Paul. Thank you. And as you were talking, I was thinking about the conversation that we had earlier in the series, thinking about jobs and wages and how important it is to think about truly what people are being paid and how that affects their ability to save, to forecast, to have buffers that save them in moments of crisis and change. And so it's a perfect comment and very welcome. And is a great connecting point to Brett. Since Brett, I know you and I also had this conversation about different ways of thinking about savings and how folks can really think into the future about where they are right now and what that means for 10 and 20 years into it. So Brett, let's bring you into the conversation now. You definitely think long and hard about global assets and long-term economic planners for workers, for employers and investors. I know that Putnam has a very distinguished history in this area, particularly in terms of the history of mutual funds and what that has meant for this country. I wonder if you can talk to us about your take on key strategies for closing Greater Boston's ethnic and racial wealth gaps from where you sit. Welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carolyn. And it's just an honor to be up here with everyone else on the stage. I'm glad I can be here today to talk about this a little bit. Now, when you talk about what can be done to close the wealth gap, I think it's important to dig into the Color of Wealth report a little bit and understand where it comes from. So that was kind of my starting point. And when we look at the wealth disparity that we see in the report, it's primarily the result of two things that jump off the page. The first is home ownership or building home equity. And the other is ownership of equity investments, which is primarily measured in the report through IRAs or other retirement vehicles. What these two things have in common is that they get people to save without taking regular action or even realizing it, right? They're what we in the industry would call behavioral nudges to create ongoing saving. You might think about paying a mortgage as similar to paying rent, but one of those is building home equity, right? And so that's what we talk about when we mean a nudge. Home ownership, of course, is an important part, and that was really the focus of the last panel discussion dedicated to strategies for that. So for anyone who missed it, I encourage them to view that one. But it also reminds me of something that a realtor once said to me when he was talking about a house, and he said, think of a house like a piggy bank. Now, I think he was just trying to close a sale, but there is some truth to that, right? Because it's using that mortgage to quietly build home equity that's key for saving. Now, on the investment side, I'm a manager of Putnam's target date funds. So I'm thinking about wealth accumulation every single day for our shareholders. When we think about retirement saving, it's a huge task. It's overwhelming, but you need to break it down and make it simpler and do it little by little. A lot of people have probably heard about a savings crisis in America where people are not saving enough to provide the same quality of life through retirement. What I see in the data is actually a little different than that. I think we have an accessibility crisis because people who have access to retirement savings vehicles tend to save enough. And I think we see a little bit of that in the Color of Wealth, where the people who have access to these accounts are doing pretty well at generating wealth. Where the problems lie is where people don't have access and therefore they tend to save very little, right? And if it's a very different sort of experience, if you think every time you get a paycheck, you need to actively opt into saving versus something that's done automatically before the money even shows up on your paycheck or in your direct deposit account. And so I think that can really inform us on how we battle the wealth gap and how we take actions going forward. Just one other quick thing, since Stephen teed me up to share knowledge, and I'm going to cite a paper here. There's a great paper in 2004 called Save More Tomorrow. One of the authors has a Nobel Prize at this point. They designed a program to ramp savings over time for people who had chronically undersaved. And so instead of doing it all at once, they ramp savings slowly over a period of time and in line with raises to people's income so that their take-home pay, importantly, never decreased. And they were able to raise people's savings rates who were living paycheck to paycheck and said they couldn't possibly save any more. They raised it from 3% to 13% in the matter of a few years. And so when people tell me that, no, people can't possibly save more or they're not able to, I think the lesson is we need to have thoughtful design to enable them to make the right decisions. And so if we can do that, I think we can make a lot of progress on the wealth gap itself.
Thanks, Brett, and thanks for bringing in some new data and a new resource for us. You've helped us shift gears a little bit to thinking about actions and what can we do. So the panel itself today is really about sort of springing to action, to helping people give folks some ideas in terms of actions and steps toward wealth building right here today, right here at home. And Brett, you certainly hit us off in that way. And I'm wondering if we could do some time traveling a little bit for each of you to imagine your 20-year-old self, if you could give yourself advice or guidance in terms of what you would do today to thinking about your own future wealth planning and managing. You all are specialists in different ways about what people can do at the individual and collective level. And I'm wondering if you've thought about yourself, but maybe you were always ahead of the curve. Could be, knowing all of you, you probably were already on the game, on top of this 20 or so years ago. But I'm wondering what advice you might have given yourself, or what advice you might give to our audience here today. So Chief Idowu, could we start with you? What advice would you give to your younger self and or to us in terms of how to jumpstart this personal wealth building? What can we do?
Well, if I were looking at my 20-year-old self, I would say buy fewer suits.
Their suits are so great. Why?
I know, but they cost some money that could be saved, as Brett was just talking about. So, but I actually, Brett has hit it on the head. Actually, I mean, I would have told myself to invest more, to save more, and to do the same with my family. So, my grandfather actually was a great example because he lived on a very small budget, but saved a lot of what he took in. And some family members learned, some others are learning now. And I think at 20, I would have not only done something for myself, but for the family, because I think, it would help us out more. And I think for a lot of families the same way. In terms of the audience, I mean, as a resource, one of the departments that I've had the privilege of being able to work with in this role is the Office of Financial Empowerment, which is based in Roxbury. And they have an incredible amount of resources. The folks who have been there for like 20, 30 years have done so much to help folks, whether it's with taxes, whether it's with the saving, building their credit, all those types of things I think are important for folks to get connected to and to utilize as they either start their journey to building individual or community wealth, or want to add some more tools to their toolbox.
I think that's right. I think Alan Gentle is still over there getting it done. Pretty incredible.
Right.
Yeah, it's a great resource. Betty, how about you? Notes for your earlier version of yourself going forward. What would you do?
So I think a lot of it is the things I ended up doing in my late 20s and 30s that I wish I could have done sooner. So I will tell you a super quick story. So a lot of these tools came to me fortuitously. Nobody in my family or friends said, hey, Betty, this is what you should do, because growing up very modestly in a single parent household, we didn't have conversations about money. Right? It was like check to check. And oftentimes, just hoping, right, that you could have enough to do something that you wanted, maybe go to a movie or go to a restaurant. Like those were not conveniences that I take for granted now available to me then. But three things that I think helped me with the building wealth journey was one, I was very fortunate to go to college, law school, and business school debt-free, full scholarships for all. That is very lucky, right? Hopefully, I had a little bit of smartness too. So that is, I think, one of the reasons, right? I could start saving because I didn't have to pay off any debt. And I refused to take any student loans, right? So I think I took one year for living expenses. And by the way, I rolled that into my first mortgage. So just a little point. So that was one. Two, out of law school, I early on, I was a corporate lawyer like Paul. And it was at a time when salaries just kept going up and up and up. And I said, rather than living large, I'm going to save all this money so I can buy my first apartment. And again, timing is key, right? It was just the beginning of the boom in the south end of Boston. I was able to get my first little 700 square foot apartment because a broker explained to me what a mortgage was and why it was better to buy than rent. And I didn't know any of this stuff. So I was able to start that journey of home ownership, building equity to buy then the next one, build more equity, right? So it is a pathway, right, to start to build that nest egg. And then again, from Brett's point, right, retirement savings, someone had to tell me you should plow as much money into your 401k. In fact, open other accounts, right, outside of that 401k to save. Insurance is another one that we don't talk about. No one wants to talk about dying or death. And insurance products are also savings vehicles, really effective ones, because you can borrow against them later. In fact, that's probably what I'm going to do to pay for my kids' college, right? Because we've plowed so much savings and cash value into insurance. And the other last point, I would say is these are not, these were all helpful to build wealth, but in the end, it also takes a really good paying job, right, to build enough savings to achieve these things. And to Paul's point about livable wages and valuing our workers, we have to think beyond that, right? We have to think about what are really good jobs. They pay good wages, but they also provide paid time off, professional development. They back you in a crisis, right? And that is what so few of our community members have, right? Because they're in jobs that don't value them and definitely don't provide the level of benefits that we need to build sustainability and stability. So, and then for I would say one last thing, because we often don't talk about the very poor that are either living in subsidized housing and on public benefits. And that's where we need to actually change systems and policies, because our public benefits programs don't allow you to save, right? They limit how much you can save. And so you're in a perpetual cycle of poverty. You can't get out. So we have to start to think differently about our programs for the poor, which are, looked at as handouts and rather than a leg up. And that is where we can start to drive some transformation.
Absolutely. The cliff effect is a real thing. And Betty, as I imagined about you, you were ahead of the curve even back then. Shagun and I were buying outfits and snacks or who knows what, and Betty was investing in real estate. So there's no surprise there. Amazing. Paul, how about you? Your 20-year-old self? What would you tell yourself in terms of building wealth? What's the word?
It's always hard to follow Betty because I would do anything Betty recommends. But I would say, to put a little gloss on it, it's not just one nest egg, it's a bunch of nest eggs. It's good to diversify, because what I found is that, when I did buy insurance and save through insurance, or when I did open, a CD somewhere, I forgot about that money. And so when it came time to spend money, I didn't know about it and I felt poor. And so that affected my decisions. Whereas if you put it all in one account, you're looking at that account all the time and you're making calculations about, well, how much can I spend and still reach my goal? But I ended up with maybe a half a dozen savings investment vehicles that I just simply forgot about for the longest periods of time. And it was the same with my parents. Whenever we needed to do something, whenever we had an emergency, they somehow had a bag of money somewhere under the mattress or something. They just put away a little bit every week when they got paid into a jar or something, and it adds up. And as the only person on this panel who's retired, I can tell you the power of compounding. And 50 years from your 20-year-old self, if you've started putting money away at 20, that has really grown a lot. So I would encourage folks to save money. Whatever amount you can save, no amount is too small. Put it in places where you forget about it so you don't spend it.
Great advice. Thanks, Paul. And Brett, this is your bailiwick here. Let's see how you were doing at your 20-year-old self. What advice would you give to yourself, and what's the takeaway?
All right, thanks. Well, look, if you're like Paul and you open up a bunch of different accounts, just make sure you write it down and don't forget about them forever, just for a little while. But yeah, I think Paul makes a great point that when you think about your 20-year-old self, your competitive advantage is time, right? Time is on your side. And that's really where a little bit at that time, whether it's savings or something else, makes a big difference in the long term, right? The power of compounding is on your side. But also, I think more broadly is when you're 20, I think you should be investing in yourself. And so maybe that's different accounts, maybe it's different savings, maybe it is a certain type of education or just building out your career skills. But you really need to be focused on what you're trying to achieve and having the courage and the tenacity to invest in yourself to achieve that.
Great. So motivational as well. So Brett, thank you for that. We're also starting to get some questions through the chat, and I know we have a couple more minutes before Jim jumps on and closes us out. I'd love to just share a couple of questions here. One question in particular is kind of the opposite to this question that we just asked, which was thinking about your 20-year-old self. What would you tell yourself? The participant here says that they are a retired senior and they regret not having saved enough to be comfortable in retirement and leaving a non-debt ridden legacy for my children. I fear being one pension check away from losing my house. What can I do short of winning the lottery to help begin to build wealth this late in life? Brett, maybe I can look to you. So you were touching on some of this idea about savings and what can that look like, and if there's someone else who wants to add. But Brett, maybe we can provide some guidance for this participant.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question. There's no easy answers. I think one thing that everyone up here sort of noted in their own way is a lot of lessons that we've learned from behavioral finance of how to nudge yourself into good decisions. And so this is something that you could apply to a 20-year-old or a near retiree, is set yourself up for success. So if we're thinking about, when I get that pension check, maybe I'm gonna immediately take $20 and put it into an account on the side, like Paul was kind of alluding to, right? Different things, because we know once that money hits you, it's easy to get redirected. So if you just start sort of compartmentalizing different things, it can help you deal with different scenarios. I guess the classic thing is going back to work or working a little longer. Hopefully it's something that fulfills you and it's not purely an income-driven need at that point. But I would think about laying out your goals. I think putting it down on paper does a lot, right? It's hard to keep it all up here. You need to make a budget, think about how you're going to achieve those goals and then set yourself up for success.
Great. Thanks, Brett. Betty, there's also a question here that is targeted a bit to you and asking whether BII is still focused locally only on businesses, or if you all are considering opportunities outside of Greater Boston with this new fund that's mentioned. And there's another question about this new fund, and so would love for you to give folks some
Sure. Yeah, so yes, it is. BII's original fund was focused on investments in Eastern Massachusetts. Our new one will be investing across the whole state, and in fact, New England and upstate New York. So there would be a broader geographic footprint for sure. And I'm happy to share more offline with that person. I'm also, can I address, there's a separate question in the Q&A. Could I address it?
Sure.
I'm seeing it. So it's regarding, it's no surprise, like there's a lot of focus on home ownership, right? As a way of building wealth. It's a fast way to build wealth. But another thing we don't talk about as often is also the affordability of where you live, whether you're renting or you're sharing. We are in a massive housing crisis right now. And part of it is driven by the high costs of rent. And I agree that I think this is the point of this comment, in that there are housing advocates also saying that it's a multiple part strategy of both. You have to increase home ownership, but you also need to decrease rent costs. And you can do that by building more housing stock that's affordable, but you can also take speculative housing off the market and make it affordable. And there's a fantastic deal that I encourage all of you to look at that just closed in East Boston, where the East Boston CDC acquired 36 buildings, 114 units from a developer, and put them in a new kind of entity called a mixed-use neighborhood trust that is both community governed, so community will make decisions around it, and it's a permanently affordable structure that ensures that rents remain at 40, 60, 80, 100% AMI. That is how you start to change the trajectory for families, right? So we have to use multiple strategies. It can't just be all our eggs in one basket around how we deal with the affordability crisis and the housing crisis in our area.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Chief Idul and Paul, I'd love to get you guys in here before we close out. Chief, what is on your mind right now? What's keeping you up late at night? What's giving you a sense of hope? Can you give us a couple bullets? That's a long conversation, but just want to know what's on your mind and what's giving you encouragement right now. You got a big portfolio. We're so excited for it, but what's on your mind?
Yeah, it's funny because after my first week on the job, someone came up to me and said, "There's still a racial wealth gap. Look what's going on." I thought we were going to fix that. So that's obviously constantly on my mind because even in my previous role, I work for a mayor who has a very bold vision for not just the city, but really the region. And, and so what's keeping me up is that I have this broad vision right along with her about how we not only are eliminating the racial wealth gap, not closing it, but doing it in our lifetimes, which of course sounds impossible to everybody, but we have to have something to aspire to, and chipping away at something for me is not the type of vision I want to chase. I mean, the fact that we're still talking about things that we were talking about 50 years ago makes me and a whole lot of other people upset. And so I prefer that we have bold visions that we're constantly chasing. So for me, what's keeping me up is, that big issue, but also all the programs that we're working on to attempt to address, this issue. All these, we have accomplished a lot this year, but we also know that there's a whole lot more to do. We're not resting on our laurels. And so I'm actually, the other part that's keeping me up is excitement at being able to work with the folks on the call and others who are watching on things like, my team out of the 350 million in ARPA dollars, got 25 million of that. And there's a bunch of initiatives that we are working on, whether it's on to something that Betty talked about earlier, on acquisition, on helping small business owners own their property, or programs that will help build and scale women and BIPOC-owned businesses in a meaningful way, or even initiatives to help locate more of these businesses in highly foot trafficked areas. A lot of our businesses open up small shops, in our neighborhoods, but there's very little diversity in places like Copley, Seaport, downtown, et cetera. And excited to be able to launch a program to help people expand to these places so that we are generating increased revenue for these businesses to what everyone has been saying, be able to pay better wages, to provide more benefits, things like that. So on the one hand, there are big things that are keeping me up, the poverty rate, particularly child poverty, but then exciting things to work on with folks, like I said. And then again, Betty mentioned another point on the cooperatives, another thing that we want to be the city in the country with the most business cooperatives. So anyway, long list, but we're excited to get them done in less than 3 years.
It's fantastic, and I know you will. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. We are at time. So Paul and Brett, Betty, and Chief, thank you so much for the time. I know that Jim is going to come in and take us home. Thank you all for just giving us so much to think about and to chew on. I know there'll be some resources that are shared more broadly with our audience so that people can follow up on some of these incredible things that you've mentioned and announced. It has been an honor and a pleasure to have this very quick moving hour with you. A delight, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Carolyn, and thank you, Betty, Brett, Paul, Shagun. What a fascinating conversation, and could have gone on much longer. I'm sure others on the call feel the same way, that these tidbits of advice and reflections on the work you're doing and the experiences you've had are so meaningful to this conversation. So thank you to that. Paul is a son of Depression era parents. I understand the bag of money concept, and maybe that frugality and the knowledge that you got to put something away. Maybe they weren't so wrong about that, right? We always think our parents don't get it, but maybe they did, right? A couple of themes I heard was that there are some tools and opportunities out there, but, sometimes the access isn't there and sometimes the awareness isn't there. Betty, as you were talking about insurance products, for example, people run away from that word a lot, as opposed to sort of embrace the opportunity within it. So I think and Carolyn, in our toolbox there, we'll have to think about that. And finally, the theme that I thought each of you in some way shared was taking control of your destiny and investing in yourself. I like that phrase, Brett, when you used it. There's an element there too. And I close by saying that, this is a big challenge. Shagun, I hope you can get it dealt with in 3 years. But as several of you said on the panel, it's going to take a team effort and collaboration, government, business, nonprofit, the work that you all are doing. And I'm just proud to be in the community of people that are thinking about it with you. So with that, Carolyn Crockett, you're amazing. Thank you for leading this series for the Chamber and all the hard work that you did. I know it takes some preparation and thinking. And to my friends at Putnam, Stephen, thank you so much for enabling us to make this series available in a wide basis. The work continues, but for now, everyone have a great day.